Welcome to I Hate James Dobson, a podcast that all my friends say is really good, but I have to listen to it in bits because it's also really traumatizing. Kat told me that.
Me too.
Hey everyone, this is Jake, and welcome to I Hate James Dobson, one therapist journey learning audio engineering in real time. I want to start off this episode with some incredible news. We got a shout out in Time magazine, or at least on their website, in an article by Sarah McMahon titled, "The Root of James Dobson's Political Power is Decades of Parenting Advice." I've been working on this podcast for about a year now, and I started off with a grudge and a dream, and I figured, give it 10 episodes, see what happens. If it doesn't work out, no worries, at least you tried. The fact that this is our 11th episode, and that we have no signs of slowing down, is wild. I'm so grateful to each of you for enjoying the show, for leaving reviews, for connecting with us on social media, and mostly just for listening. It's been a joy to connect with you, and truly an honor to hear your stories. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Okay, so about this episode and kind of a big tonal shift, I want to give a content warning up top. We are going to continue talking about period culture, which, as we talked about last episode, is just rape culture with a button-up. We have a lot of fun clouding on this really shitty book, and I think that this episode in particular is really worth a full listen, but you have to take care of yourself first. If that means taking breaks or skipping it altogether, you have my blessing. And now, on with the show. Welcome to I Hate James Dobson. I'm Jake, a former evangelical turned queer sex therapist. And as always, I am joined by the absolutely astounding Brooke. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Jake.
It's been a second since we last recorded.
Yep.
What's new in your world?
I went on vacation.
You did?
Yes, I did. I took a vacation for the first time in a very long time.
Very long time.
Very long time. And then I came back, and now I'm back at work, and there was a, assassination attempt. And
there was. We are recording this, funny enough, on the day, probably right now as we're recording, that Donald Trump is giving his speech at the RNC.
Wow.
Just to date this podcast a little bit.
Just in case you want to adjust your ear bandages.
I feel like you and I have been collaborating on a lot of things recently.
Yes.
I really like working with you here at our job that actually pays us money at 2 a.m. when we should both really be asleep. I enjoy getting to spend all the time with you.
I like it too. I especially like the 2 a.m. time. We are big night owls.
We really are.
Sometimes we don't start texting until about 10:30.
That's when it starts. Okay. Today is part 3 in our 4-part series on purity culture.
Ugh.
So far, we've talked about Dobson's book, Bringing Up Girls, and explore how Dobson helped create purity culture, and also like what the fuck purity culture actually is. Brooke, are there any standouts from this experience for you?
Yeah. Yes, there are. I think my favorite part of this was in the last, maybe 2 episodes ago, part 1, where you really just couldn't stop laughing, knowing that you were going to torture me. I was struck by purity rings. I was struck by purity balls. I was struck by
purity sphincters.
Purity sphincters. I was struck by the entire body of purity. Uh-huh. And, yeah, not surprised, but shocked, I guess is what I'd say. Mm-hmm. Do we still have to talk about bringing up girls today?
No. But mostly no. So in writing this episode, I stumbled across a piece of information that apparently I had tried really hard to suppress in my brain, because I knew about this at one point, but it did not come up until I'd seen these words. We had talked about purity balls and how incestuous they feel. I'd forgotten, but Dobson encourages, and these are his words, what he calls daddy-daughter dating. According to Wikipedia, the purpose of this is to set time aside for special activities together. Okay, weird title. Spend time with your kids. Sure, that's fine.
Right.
This, according to Dobson, though, is meant to model proper heterosexual partnership to girls.
Oh, God.
Brooke, how old do you think the girls that Dobson suggests do daddy-daughter dating?
For daddy-daughter dating?
Uh-huh.
I'm sure it's something like 4 or 5, right?
So it's ages 6 and under.
And under.
And under.
Gross.
So it's important to model proper heterosexual partnership to your 4-year-old girl by dating her.
I'm so confused because can't you model that by being with your wife in the Dobson world?
Mm-hmm. So again, in isolation, spend time with your daughter, set time aside specifically to invest in your kids, sure.
Sure.
But in the context of Dobson's work, in the context of this fucking book that we read that's literally over half just about protecting your daughter's virginity, this just feels super incestuous.
Well, what it feels like to me is like really hammering in this idea of loyalty.
Yes.
Right? It's like, yeah, the title is incestuous and stuff like that, but I don't think it's so much about that as it is like, if you break these rules, you will hurt your daddy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And there is I don't know what it's like for you, but there is a thing, I think, for most like girls about not wanting to hurt their dads or disappoint their dads, right?
Absolutely. A big thing, we're going to get into this more in not our next episode, but once we're done with this purity culture series, obedience is like the attribute that they really try to instill in kids. In evangelical spaces. It's authoritarian parenting, which is all about you're going to listen to me and obey me, and everything that you do is a reflection of me, so you better shape up.
Yeah, because I'm the dad, or because I'm the adult.
Because I'm God in this family. Mm-hmm. Like, God's God, but there's a pretty famous picture, let me see if I can Google it, that's like different umbrellas of like who has authority, and up top is God, and then under God is husband, and then under that is wife, and then under that is kids. But God's not in your household in a physical way.
Right.
If you believe God exists at all. So really what that says is dad's God.
Yeah.
Anyway, this has nothing really directly, at least, to do with our book today, but I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because there's no one that can challenge dad then either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For today's misadventure,
yeah,
we are analyzing a book not written by James Dobson.
Ooh.
But it's very much inspired by him.
Oh.
We are reading a book that, to some, defined the purity culture movement. I want to cover this book because I think it touches on something that's often overlooked by the absurdity of purity culture and its beliefs around sex. That purity culture also has some ass-backwards belief about relationships. This is written by a man named Joshua Harris in 1997, at the very start of the purity movement. Today we are covering...
Here it comes. It's coming out of the backpack.
I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Okay. All right.
Describe the cover of this book. It's a pretty famous one for anyone who has seen it.
Well, it's got like a man in a fedora, and he's sort of tipping his hat as if to say, "M'lady, m'lady," or what's the Casablanca? Smell you later, kid. No, say it again, Sam. What is it? Whatever. It's that, and then in cursive it says, "I kissed dating," and then in bold it says, "Goodbye." It looks like a romance novel.
It does. I was talking with one of my very good friends, Nick, about this book, about this podcast, and he asked, like, why did this book become famous? Like, there's a lot of books that were talking about sex and relationships, especially around, like, the start of the purity culture movement. So why this book? And mostly, it's because the cover is very striking. It looks like a romance novel. The title, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, is very catchy. It's like, ooh, I know what it's about, but I want to know more.
And kissed.
A kissed, yeah. It's very provocative.
Yeah, there's a little quiz on the back.
There's a little quiz.
Yeah. You want me to ask you one of the questions?
Right? Yeah.
Quick? Does your current... I want you to think about boyfriend while I ask you this, okay? Does your current relationship hinder you from serving God as a person?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, a single person. What is your motivation in a relationship? Pleasing yourself or serving the other person? Serving. And finally, do you give yourself away physically or emotionally in ways you regret later?
I don't regret it.
Right.
So before we get into it, let's talk about some context.
Okay.
So firstly, you and I are not the intended audience of this book. We are not 20-something evangelicals in 1997. We're not church leaders who care about 20-somethings in 1997. This book is explicitly written for young people as they explore intimate relationships. You should know, evangelical world has a very weird relationship with relationships, and especially with young people. In evangelical world, you get married. It is not a question. To not be married at 20, okay, so maybe you should be. Maybe you should like be looking for someone seriously, but that's okay. To not be married at 25? Well, that's concerning. You're out of college? You should be starting a family. To not be married at 30? That means you failed. The term singles gets thrown around a lot in this world, and it's always made me uncomfortable. Like, us as singles? Like, why single people? But I don't know. Maybe that's just me thing. But it's built into the social structures. There are small groups, Bible studies for married people. There are so many family events focused on raising a strong family, like childcare, VBS, Awana. A lot of things that we've talked about are all family focused. The main draw for a lot of people to the church is free childcare and child support. So single people get largely sectioned off into their own ever-dwindling group. If you go especially to like a small church, the singles group, basically you date each other and get married until there's like one person left or two people left or whatever. This book reads like a guy from your youth group who went to his first year of college and is now back to tell you all about what the world is really like. He turns his chair. What it looks like. Yeah. He turns his chair backwards, sits down, and starts with "Sex is awesome." Because that's who Joshua Harris was. We're going to talk about him a little bit more as well. But remember the True Love Awaits event that we talked about last episode? We put all those purity pledge cards in the National Mall.
Yeah.
Joshua Harris was at that.
Oh.
It was in 1994. He was 18 at that time. And this is a quote from him. Quote, "The True Love Awaits rally and movement really shaped my thinking. It was the thought that saving sex for marriage was the most important thing. And if we wanted to do that, then we needed to be willing to radically change the way that we approach relationships. Dating was just leading us into moments of compromise and temptation, and that was shaping the influence in writing this book." So at the start of the purity culture movement, in a world hyper-focused on marriage and reproduction forced onto young adults, I Kissed Dating Goodbye was born. The book starts with really strong imagery, and this is one of the most cited things in the book. I'm going to read it. And it's a little play.
Yes.
Brooke, I've highlighted your lines.
This is exciting.
It's finally here. Anna's wedding day. The day that she had dreamed about and planned for months. The small, picturesque church was crowded with friends and family. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, and the gentle music of a string quartet filled the air. Anna walked down the aisle towards David. Joy surged within her. This was the moment for which she had waited for so long. He gently took her hand, and they turned toward the altar. But as the minister began to lead Anna and David through their vows, the unthinkable happened. A girl stood up in the middle of the congregation, walked quietly to the altar, and took David's other hand. Another girl approached and stood next to the first, followed by another. Soon, a chain of 6 girls stood by him as he repeated his vows to Anna. Anna felt her lip begin to quiver and tears well up in her eyes.
"Is this some kind of joke?"
she whispered to David. I'm sorry, Anna, he said, staring at the floor.
"Who are these girls, David? What is going on?"
she gasped. "They're girls from my past," he answered sadly. "Anna, they don't mean anything to me now, but I've given a piece of my heart to each of them."
"I thought your heart was mine,"
she said. It is, he pleaded. "Everything that's left of it is yours." A tear rolled down Anna's cheek, and then she woke up. That's the most Tumblr-ass bullshit. Oh my god.
Wait, I want you to know that as a person who is a writer and went to undergrad for creative writing, there's no finer literature than the ones that end with, "and then she woke up."
And then everybody clapped. You are an award-winning playwright. Is that not what you put in the end of all of your really emotional scenes?
Yeah. And then they woke up.
Yeah.
It's a real easy way to not have to explain anything.
You want to make sure that there's stakes, right?
I liked the use of, "and that she gasped. She whispered."
Yeah. Honestly, we could end the analysis of the book here. Like, that is pretty much the central theme, argument, imagery, emotional context that it gets into here. It's not just sex that corrupts purity. Giving your heart away, falling in love with anyone but your spouse is corruptive.
And this is really at the heart of monogamy too, right? This idea that like there's this limited amount of space in your heart, that your heart is this place, right?
Yeah.
And that it is finite.
Love, in this depiction, love is a finite resource.
Right.
Yeah. I'm giving you a piece of my heart that I cannot get back.
And now I have less.
Obviously, he's advocating to not date. He'll try to wiggle his way through it and say like, well, I'm not dating, but maybe you should just reconsider. But he just doesn't want you to date. So what is his definition of dating? My definition, based on his descriptions, is intimacy without commitment. Intimacy without commitment is not how our Lord and Savior Betty White designed relationships to be. Quote, I believe the fundamental problem with relationships today is that we've disconnected romance and commitment.
Say it again.
The fundamental problem with relationships today is that we've disconnected romance and commitment. I wrote wrong, it's capitalism. I have many committed relationships that aren't romantic, like with you, like with my dad, like with the people that I see for therapy that I have in a contractually obligated relationship, right? That's commitment. I don't have romantic feelings towards any of those people,
right?
Nor would I want to. In this book, he tries to elevate the role of friends. They say, like, you should care about your friends as well, and more than we do, which is good, but that's not actually what he does in practice. He just pushes the timeline back in which it's okay to have friends. Once you're married, you have a spouse, not friends, at least not of the opposite sex.
Oh, interesting.
Dating is how the world, and the world is a coded evangelical language for any non-evangelical space people, says that you should find a spouse, a flippant process centered on self-gratification. You date someone who makes you happy, and as soon as they stop making you happy, you dump them for the next best thing.
Right.
Dating is inappropriate because it's self-centered, and it makes people feel disposable because you get too intimate. And there are some people that do just engage in a version of serial monogamy, which just go from person to person to person. They do treat people as disposable. That's a real thing, but that's not all of what dating is or can be. He compares dating to hookups, which we all obviously agree are bad. Quote, but while we frown on the idea of sexual hookups, we have our own sanitized version of the hookup in recreational dating. I wanted to be able to enjoy romance before marriage, to become intimate and close with whomever I wanted. There's a really important word in this, to become intimate and close, intimacy. Joshua Harris in this book argues that intimacy with anyone besides your spouse, emotional intimacy, not just physical intimacy, emotional intimacy with anyone besides your spouse is cheating, is adultery.
So would you say, having read this book, that this is being geared towards women?
I don't think it's actually super gendered in that way.
Okay.
He talks a decent amount about women, but also it talks to men. He kind of has portions dedicated to each.
Okay. Interesting.
The sections towards women aren't good, and there's a lot of misogyny built into that, which we'll talk about, but it very much is just for young people generally.
Yeah. But it is this idea of, like, be afraid and keep your life small.
This is what he says are bad habits of dating. Dating tends to skip the friendship stage of a relationship. So you're not friends, you just start dating.
I disagree.
That is not true for every relationship. Dating often mistakes physical relationship for love. If I make out with you, that's what love is. If you have sex with me, that's what love is. But according to Joshua Harris, love is separate or more than that, which I agree with, but I don't think that's a flaw of dating.
Right.
Dating often isolates couples from other vital relationships. Again, that's possible. There are people who make their entire world their partner, and then once they're out of that relationship, have no friends left. But again, that's not inherent to dating. Dating can distract young people from the primary responsibility of preparing for the future.
These are all things that, like, could happen to anyone, but aren't necessarily what will happen to everyone.
And for this point, he tells the story of a high school couple who dated and therefore didn't devote more time playing in the church's worship band or going on mission trips. So that's what he's talking about. Like, preparing for the future means investing in the church. Also, side note, mission trips are scams. They're just colonialism in action, and I hate them.
Yes.
Dating can cause discontent with God's gift of singleness.
God's gift of singleness?
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I'm God's gift of singleness.
You're God's gift to singleness. There's a point here. Like, I do think more people should spend more time being single and make peace with being by themselves. Obviously, like, with community and other relationships, but, like, sure. But again, you can be good with all that and then also date. Dating can create an artificial environment for evaluating another person's character. Quote, in friendship, they can practice the skills of relating, caring, and sharing their lives with other people. In friendship, they can observe other people's characters and begin to see what they'll one day want in a mate. Wasting too much time trying each other out as boyfriend and girlfriend can actually distract two people from the more important task of preparing to be good spouses.
What? That's so strange.
What I think he's getting at in like my language is he's talking about like the honeymoon phase of relationships, where you're trying to like, you're in all these good feelings and it's warm and bubbly and you're trying to like show your best self to the other person, and you see the person entirely through rose-colored glasses. And when you're in that phase, you're not able to see the person as a flawed individual, and that relationships have conflict.
Well, you tell me if you think this is true, because you're the relationship counselor here. But don't you feel like you kind of need that honeymoon phase and rose-colored glasses phase in order to get to a point where you can see the person with all their flaws and accept it?
It's just a natural part of relationships.
Right. It's
not inherently problematic. And something that we'll see throughout all of this is his proposed alternative is just this. His counter argument to dating is courtship.
Oh.
And there's some important differences, but also you have these same potential flaws for that.
Yeah, you also have these same potential flaws for marriage.
Yes.
Like all these things can happen in marriage as well.
But again, I think it's important to remember that he's writing to like 16-year-olds.
Yeah, that's true.
So this whole time when I've been writing the script and reading this book, I see relationships throughout the lifespan from 16 to fucking 78. And the I feel like a much more nuanced understanding what relationships can be. It not only is he writing to teens, it feels like his only idea of dating relationships comes from 16-year-olds.
Yeah, it's really juvenile.
Mm-hmm.
How come you don't see 79-year-olds?
Too old. I'm very ageist in that way. AARP is fine, but dating often becomes an end in and of itself. So I'm just in this relationship to be in a relationship. Again, there are people who do that. That's fair, but that's not inherent to dating. And you can do the same thing for courtship. You can do the same thing for marriage. Quote, while not all dating relationships make these mistakes, what I hope you see is that the problems in dating can't be fixed by merely dating right. Yes, they can. Even those Christians who avoid the major pitfalls of premarital sex and traumatic breakups often spend much of their energy wrestling with temptation.
Wow.
What a freak.
What a freak. Can I tell you a thing about dating really quick? I have this theory that I think a lot of women share, maybe other people too, but that like you have to date an asshole, like usually about the time you're like 20 or 21 or 19. And like it's like, oh yeah, that was your asshole. Like it's a thing we say to each other, right? And it's like you have to date that person or have a connection with that person so that you can avoid that person forever, right? And it's like dating serves a lot of purposes. It's like what you like, what you don't like, what you tolerate, what you don't want to tolerate, right? It's so important. And it is so confusing. Like, is the fear just that they'll have sex? Is that the fear?
No, because we're going to talk about intimacy, but it's any emotional intimacy. Any kind of emotional intimacy with specifically a person of the opposite sex who's not your spouse is infidelity, is cheating, is adultery, which is a sin that you commit against your future spouse and also against yourself and God.
Wow.
It's high. This raises the stakes on relationships.
What's going on with Joshua Harris?
We're going to talk about him, actually. But before we get that, let's talk about intimacy.
Yeah.
And purity. Quote, purity is a direction, not a line which we suddenly cross by going too far. The enemy of your soul would love to mar this beauty of your blossoming love by leading you down a path of lust and sexual compromise. We heard a lot of these things in our last episode about what purity culture actually is. He uses some of the same Bible verses like Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things, who can understand it? Though the advice of many well-meaning people today is to follow your heart, the Bible warns us that your heart can lead you in wrong, even deadly directions. Our hearts lie. Something that can feel right can be completely wrong. Don't trust yourself. Don't listen to yourself.
Right.
Don't do it because you're wrong and you know you're wrong on some level. Obedience, as we were saying.
Right.
Especially obedience connected to relationships and sexuality. Intimacy, importantly, is never clearly defined in this book. And I think it wasn't like calculating, but I think that's on purpose. Because the slipperiness of this language makes it feel like a stronger argument than it is. But generally it's used to refer to anything more than what you do with a friend. and a friend boundaries, according to a sheltered 21-year-old guy in the 1990s. Another piece of context for you and like what was going on with him. Joshua Harris's family homeschooled him, and it was one of the first families to do evangelical homeschooling.
Oh.
So sheltered evangelical kid in a world where that wasn't really a thing yet. Like
right.
Leading edge, like real sheltered, sequestered, like kind of like an observer of mainstream secular culture in a way that wasn't really a thing before this.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 2 is subtitled "The Joy of Intimacy is the Reward of Commitment." And that's kind of his thesis for relationships.
The joy of intimacy is the reward of commitment.
So you commit to a relationship first, specifically a marital relationship, and then you develop intimacy, and that intimacy, which feels good and is a natural part of most relationships, that's the joy of commitment.
Okay.
But most people, according to Joshua Harris, do the opposite. They feel intimacy, they become intimate with someone, and then they decide later on whether or not they want to be committed to them. Which is true in some, and even a lot of cases, but also I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. I disagree fundamentally with this title. Quote, "You might say that intimacy between a man and a woman is the icing on the cake of a relationship headed towards marriage." Again, intimacy doesn't just mean sex here. It means literally any meaningful type of intimacy. Sexual, physical, emotional. Quote, "In God's plan, the personal benefits of an intimate relationship, emotional or sexual, are always closely linked to self-sacrificial love and commitment to another person's long-term good." This is another important thing. Self-sacrificial love versus selfish love.
Mm.
This is a thing that evangelicals love to talk about. In ancient Greek, there's a lot of different words for love. There's eros, where you get the word erotic, right? There's philos, which is brotherly love. That's where you get Philadelphia from. There's also agape love, which is written as agape, which is always very funny to me. But agape love is self-sacrificial love. In the Bible, it's what God's love for humanity. And Joshua Harris is saying, like, that's the type of love you should have for your spouse, in contrast to the world's very self-centered love.
Did you just say that's what Philadelphia is named after?
Yeah, the city of brotherly love.
I never knew that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning so much on this blog.
It is an educational blog, dear reader. And to a point, I agree, right? In familial relationships, of which a spouse, I believe, is part of your family, chosen family as well, there should be a level of self-sacrifice. You make compromises. You go out of your way to do things that are uncomfortable or even hurtful to you because you love another person. I think that's a good part of relationships. You're also allowed to be selfish at times. There's a healthy level of selfishness in relationships. We're going to talk about this a lot when it comes to sex, but like people to say, like, I want you to do this solely for my pleasure, in context, in specific times, of course, but like that, not only is that good, it's actually really important to do. But again, as we see with a lot of evangelical thinking, flattens it out, very black and white. It's only self-sacrificial. It cannot be selfish.
Right. I feel like I talk about this with a lot of my clients so much. This idea of like selflessness being like the ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. And if you like really sort of deconstruct that, and it's like absence of yourself, yes. Right? And like not being with yourself, not being in your body, not listening to yourself, right?
Not being you.
Right, not being you. Being absent of you so that you can, And then the idea of selfishness being like the worst possible thing, what everyone wants to avoid. And it's like the presence of self, right? Mm-hmm. The prioritizing at times of self, right?
Something I do a lot with clients that I see for therapy is to say, what does good selfishness look like for you?
I love that.
Because you're allowed to be selfish, and let's not make it always a horrible, terrible word. Me going on a bike ride down the lakefront trail just because I want to is selfish. I'm doing it just because I want to.
Right.
But it's good. It's fine. It's a beautiful part of why I love living in this city.
Right. But it's always wrapped up with arrogance.
Yeah.
Right? Or wrapped up with like self before others at all times, right? Or ego. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And also don't have needs. Right? Mm-hmm. If you have needs, that's selfish. And then, although this book is written for everyone, kind of to your earlier point, we see this breakdown real hard on gender lines.
Yeah.
Women need to be entirely self-sacrificial for their husband. They don't need to have needs. They don't have sexual needs. Women don't enjoy sex, right? In this narrative purity culture, it's all for your husband's pleasure.
Right.
Selflessness.
Right. Don't be a self, be an object.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's I think I put it in here a little bit. I'll talk about this in a little bit. But like, there's this idea that your body belongs to your spouse. And that's often a pretext to condone marital rape.
Right.
And if you, I've actually heard people who I know and love, like, be told this, that if you don't let often your husband rape you in the middle of the night, you're not sacrificing. Like, that's a sacrifice that's demanded of you as a wife, which is horrible.
Yeah. I often also hear about, like, you were talking about compromise and self-sacrificing. I agree with you, but I think it also gets misunderstood, right? And there's this idea of, like, I have to do things I'm not comfortable with, or that don't feel safe, or that I don't want to do because I'm in this partnership. And sometimes that tends to be like, we're not really compromising. I'm just saying yes to things I wish I could say no to.
Absolutely.
Right.
There's an idea that's in this book that's throughout a lot of evangelical spaces, which is the idea of guarding your heart. And this is a little bit of a longer quote, but it makes me laugh. Quote, "Finally, we need to avoid those things that encourage the wrong desire. For one girl I know, guarding her heart against lust meant throwing away all of her secular romance novels."
Hell no, I gotta read that ACOTAR.
She felt convicted that the constant sensuality in those books was totally inappropriate for her to read, making her heart rich soil for seeds of lust. Another friend in college stopped spending his afternoons at the beach because of the bikini-clad girls were too great a temptation for him. Another male friend decided to abstain from all movies for 6 months.
All movies?
All movies.
Oh, okay.
Like we said in our last episode, purity culture makes you think about sex all the time. And humans are really good at pattern recognition, even when those patterns aren't actually there. So if you're primed to think about sex, you're going to see sex everywhere. And if you're primed to see things as like trying to tempt you with all their lustful whatever, you're going to see that everywhere. So movies, even movies that like are fine or might have some like mild nudity or sex scenes, but it's part of the story, all of a sudden those become big triggers. There are people, I forget who it was, there's someone somewhat famous recently who they went to go see a movie, and every time a sex scene came on, the wife just like put her hand in front of the guy's eyes so he wasn't tempted. Like, this is a thing that still happens, like guarding your heart there to not have lustful thoughts.
Right. Back to the Duggars, as always, can't get away from them. Right. They had like a code word they would use, I think, when they would see someone immodestly dressed, which really could be just like anything, like, you know, like ankles showing, whatever. But it's like they would shout it out to, like, you know, the 4-year-olds and the 5-year-olds and everyone in that group. And so it's really implanting the idea of sex and curiosity and like, what did it look like? What was that? Right. And sort of constantly reminding people who are at an age where they might not even be thinking about it at all. Yeah.
One of the worst ironies of purity culture is that they say so hard they're trying to protect kids from sex, but they sexualize kids, both in this like incestuous bit that we talked about up top, but also in that like, hey, 5-year-old, you should think about what your virginity means.
Right.
You should think about what modesty is, because you don't want to tempt men in your life.
Right.
Ugh, even just saying that makes me feel
But
gross.
also you should date daddy.
Any physical intimacy in this worldview is harmful. Quote, "A couple once told me that their motto was, where physical progression begins, depth progression ends. In other words, as soon as they begin to focus on the physical side of their relationship, the spiritual and emotional side ceases to deepen." Which not only is like dumb and gross, also you can deepen the spiritual and emotional side of your relationship through physical intimacy. That's like a big reason why married people have sex, which is what he gets. Kind of the line is like, sex is great once you're married. And so, yeah, you can deepen it there, but not before marriage, because that's intimacy without that commitment, I guess.
How old is Joshua Harris?
When writing this book? 21. Which is why it feels like some high schooler went to college, came back, and is giving a youth group a lecture, because that's kind of what this is.
And is he married?
At this point, no. We're going to talk about his biography.
Okay, great.
Near the end.
So I'm just making it clear that this book was written by a virgin.
Yes. Okay. He had kissed people before.
Oh, yeah. Scandalous.
Quote, "Personally, I've committed," this feels very relevant. Quote, "Personally, I've committed to waiting, even for a kiss, until I'm married. I want the first kiss with my wife to be on our wedding day. I know that sounds archaic to many, and truthfully, I would have scoffed at the idea myself 4 years ago. But I've come to realize how sinful and meaningless physical intimacy can be apart from the commitment and purity of marriage." And reader of this blog, he did. He eventually did get married shortly after this book came out. And in that relationship, their first kiss was on their wedding day at the altar.
If that's what you want, you go for it.
Sure.
But, like, I'm not trying to be so judgy, but, like, that is weird.
It is weird.
That is weird.
I do a lot of weird things. Weird is not inherently bad. If that's what you want, it's weird, but it's fine.
I'm not. Weird is great. Yeah. I love weird.
But there's a really important, like slipperiness, again, sleight of hand, where the line, he says there's not a line, it's direction of purity, but the line is being moved back. Okay, don't have sex until you're married. Okay, don't hold hands until you're married. Okay, don't kiss until you're married. Okay, don't have or any emotional intimacy until you're married. Because there's no definition, because there's no line, it's this constant questioning, constant policing of self of like, is this bad? Is this across the line? Am I being lustful right now because I had a thought about a fictional character because I watched a movie? Is that cheating on my spouse?
Right. You know what I just thought of? So a lot of people are having their first kiss and losing their virginity on the same day.
Wild, huh?
That is so wild.
Uh-huh.
And also, like, that can be very jarring mentally. Like, I'm thinking about, like, the next day when you wake up and it's like, a lot just happened.
Yeah.
And, like, those are things that in dating, you're able to sort of process a little more slowly. You know, everyone's different, but it's like, you might have your first kiss when you're 13 and lose your virginity when you're 19. Just say, for example.
Random example, don't worry about it.
Random, just, you know, as an example. But those are light years apart, and you have time to sort of think through that. That is wild.
We're going to get into this as well a little bit later, but it's developmentally normative to have slowly increasing types of intimacy in relationships, both in the relationship itself and also in the lifespan. It's actually okay for 13-year-olds to have their first kiss with each other. It's a little bit less okay for them to have sex with each other, sure, but like that's them exploring relationships in a way that's healthy and not inherently destructive.
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about is like, and maybe we'll get to this, or maybe his theory is that this would exist, but it's like you have never had any physical intimacy with a person ever, according to him.
Or emotional intimacy.
And then you're supposed to have sex. Like, that's really fucked up.
And we're going to get into his idea of courting as well, but the courting experience is a lot more like business oriented.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot of like, let's sit down and discuss if we shall be good spouses for each other.
Right.
And then to go from that, you're supposed to take like walks together to talk about like life and love or whatever. But really, it's no intimacy of any kind and then all the intimacy all at once, 0 to 100. Black and white thinking.
Right. It's a little bit like arranged marriage in a way, right?
Yeah. And in some cases, it is. You're supposed to confer with we'll talk about my experience. I had to ask my parents for permission. Some people it's a little bit more intense and they say, here's who you're going to date, or I have to prove who you're going to marry, or whatever it is, and a little bit more directive and involved.
I really have not ever sat and processed this thought of how, especially you're 20 or 18 maybe, and like all of this just being sort of unleashed on you on your wedding night, and how totally like flooded you must feel after that.
Absolutely.
Wow. Scary, kind of.
Kind of to this point, quote, remember, by delaying sexual involvement, you're storing up passion and making sexual love within your marriage much more meaningful.
I don't think that's probably true.
Everyone has different meanings of things we're going to talk about. Thank God.
Thank God. Oh, that air conditioning was so loud, readers.
So sex, it's all about the meaning that we'll get into this in our next episode, but sex is all about the meaning that you assign to it. So for some people, it might be that it builds up that sexual desire and passion that gets released in marriage. I'm open to that idea. Joshua Harris supports edging.
Oh my God.
Just store up that sexual passion and then release it all at your wedding night. This is kind of a quote to end his description of this book. Quote, every time you fall in love, you give someone a piece of your heart. Every step towards a romantic relationship, holding hands, kissing, prioritizing each other, you give them a bigger and bigger piece. Since you can never get that piece of your heart, your purity back, when you finally do settle down, you're damaged goods. Those are his words. You're damaged goods. You can't fully give yourself to your partner because you've given so much of yourself, your heart, your being, away.
Your heart is not a puzzle full of pieces that you give away. And if you envision it that way, that would be rough and scary to think about how much you've given away to people and don't have of your own heart. It goes back to selflessness, right? But if you reframe it into this idea that your heart is like a beating organ in your body, right? That like you're holding space for a certain person while you're in love with them. And if that relationship ends and they leave, you no longer are holding that space, right? You might have a memory of them, but it's not these like little sectioned off pieces.
This isn't the best analogy, but neither are his, so it doesn't matter. If it's a part of your heart, it's a part of your body regrows cells. You can like get a skin graft where they physically take a part of your skin away, and then the skin will heal and it will restore itself. Heartbreak sucks, but you will still have a full heart at the end of it.
Also, who decided love is from your heart anyway, right? Like, love can come from your whole self, right? Like, sometimes it can be more physical, sometimes it can be more emotional, right? And this idea that it is like, it's like this made up idea for him that that's what it is. It's like, that's not true. It's not a thing we can see.
So that's kind of like his arguments in this book. Let's talk about what it looks like in practice. In this culture, because everything is so focused on relationships and marriage, if you start getting even a little bit emotionally intimate with someone, with a girl that says that, oh, hey, not only am I like interested in you, I like you, it's like, oh, I'm going to marry you.
Yeah, it's like Love Island.
It is. Oh my God. That's actually a really good analogy for this.
Yeah, they like are coupled up for a week and suddenly they're breaking up. Yeah.
I had my first not a girlfriend in 7th grade, like when I was 13. We met in youth group. We held hands, scandalous. She was at the youth group retreat where I became an evangelical, the one that I talked about in our How I Became an Evangelical episode. I had my first kiss. We had our first kiss under the tree outside the youth group building before it started. And when we walked in, it really felt like I had a big scarlet A on my chest. However, our love was forbidden as I was not allowed to date. I tried to get my parents to change their mind and allow us to date. And they said no because I was too young. So we didn't date. We just called each other on our cell phones. And she made me a mixtape. Definitely not dating, though.
Nope.
I ended up officially dating 2 girls as I convinced my parents that I thought God wanted me to marry each of them, which I think in itself kind of shows the folly of it. The first girl I officially dated was not an evangelical. She was a Catholic, and I got a lot of shit for that from my evangelical friends. She was kind of freaked out by the dating process, which was fair, and we broke up over my opinions about gay marriage. Which is deeply ironic.
I hope you looked her up one day.
The other was an evangelical, which who was bought into purity culture. I've talked about this relationship before, but a quick rundown. We told each other, I have a crush on you in like October near the start of the school year. We then had to each tell our parents about this. I'm not totally sure what her process was like, but mine was convincing my parents I thought God wanted me to marry her again, write out a list of rules of conduct when I'm with her, print them out, give a copy to my parents, write her dad a letter asking for his daughter's hand in dating, including my rules of conduct, meeting with her family for a family dinner, which I had to explicitly ask, go over the rules of conduct again, answer questions from the dad and the mom in front of the girl. And then after all of that, her parents came to my house after another family dinner. The parents talked amongst themselves, and only then did we get official permission to start dating. This was in like the spring. I forget exactly when this was, but this was a months-long process. At 15?
I mean, I'm sorry to laugh, but that is wild. And also, I just started thinking about the first person I ever dated, who was like, "We're gonna go sniff paint on this trampoline. Do you want to? Do you want?"
That's romance.
I did not sniff paint, readers.
Oh,
but that was the big romantic ask.
That's cute.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, like getting into it, like, what was your process of dating when you were young?
There was no process. My parents didn't have any rules about it for any of us.
Sure.
They assumed we would all start dating in high school. That felt like normal. I think if you were like getting serious with someone, eventually you would want them to meet your parents or whatever. But even that no one was getting serious enough that it was serious. There was no talk of getting married. Like, that wasn't real. And I think everyone also kind of understood. Now, this is specific to me because I grew up in, like a pretty white privileged suburb. I think everyone understood that, like, then it would be over because you'd go to college, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't know that there was a lot of long-lasting couples from high school. I certainly don't think I know anyone still married from high school. But no, I like had a group of friends. I had crushes on people. I went to dances with people. I dated some people, but not super seriously. But my parents were mostly not involved. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I went through all this process to be able to date this girl, and then realized, oh shit, I'm gay, so I had to break up with her. But breaking up with her was like breaking off an engagement, or what I assume breaking off an engagement to be. It was an ordeal. Her dad, furious with me, made me explain myself. He was technically then one of the first people I came out to.
Wow.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I was 16.
Oh no.
And I was not yet ready to come out to people, really.
Including your parents?
I'd come out to my family by that point.
Okay.
But it was before the school year started. So I came out to my parents late summer. Sometime between then and the school year, I broke up with her. And then the next day, he very angrily made me out myself at a Panera.
Ugh.
So that shit is intense. And it's not developmentally appropriate for a kid.
Right.
Ironically, by trying to protect my heart, I was forced to grow up very fast and with real fucked up relationship ideals. But that's just my personal experience. I was assigned male at birth. There's a lot of unique contextual factors for me. Let's talk about other people's experiences. Quote, if you do it this way, you'll get a marriage that is happy and fulfilling and have sex that is mind-blowing. People will call this like a money-back guarantee. He says it's not to avoid harm and heartbreak, but very clearly it is. If you want to have a perfect marriage, you do this. This is a recipe. Like Dobson's like normative directions, the relationship between men and women will work for everyone, is one of his quotes. Same idea here. If you do these steps, you will have a good marriage. Quote, I remember feeling like an abject failure because I dated my fiance. Quote, when you have a crush, you have to marry that crush. Crushes, and if you had multiple ones, were considered an emotional STD, and like emotional fornication, adultery, that sort of thing. I would get angry at myself for thinking someone was physically attractive. I learned to suppress things like blushing, so you could not physiologically tell if I liked someone or not.
Are you kidding me?
This is not me, this is a quote from somebody else, but yeah. This is an actual quote, this is someone's actual experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
If you have a crush, you have to marry that crush.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if you were married to the first crush you ever had.
I don't think I could marry Beast Boy from Teen Titans. Although, if you're listening, Beast Boy, give me a call. We've been talking about this a lot, but let's talk about like why specifically this model of dating and relationships is bad. According to psychologist Erik Erikson.
Yeah. Wait, can I tell you something really quick?
Yeah.
My friend plays a therapy-themed game of Dungeons and Dragons, and he plays Cleric Clericson.
Cleric? That's incredible. Erik Erikson's one of my favorite names of like any person in the world. Just such a Cleric Clericson's incredible. So according to psychologist Erik Erikson, your adolescence is marked by a conflict between identity and confusion. Who am I? How do I fit in socially? In your early adulthood, 19 to about 29, is marked by the conflict between intimacy and isolation. According to Erikson, that entire period of your life is spent establishing intimacy and deepening relationships with others. There are a lot of critique about Erikson's stages of development, but my point here is that it is healthy to be exploring what relationships are, what you want, and how you fit into the world. And dating can be an important piece of that. But the world of I Kiss Dating Goodbye stops you from doing basically any of that until you're married. Mm-hmm. And relationships are supposed to be intimate. Different levels, different kinds of intimacy, sure, but to not be intimate with anyone means not to have any real relationships with them. In this worldview, he says you should invest in friendships with people of the opposite sex, but not too much. And that's not really then a meaningful relationship.
No, and then where do you learn things like vulnerability and trust and everything you need for relationships?
Oh, just click into place when you're married, because that's how you have a good marriage.
Yeah, that doesn't actually happen.
And it still makes sex and marriage the most important thing. It just slightly changes the road on how to get there. He's saying we need to like move away from this model, but it's the same model, just with more shame built in. It's an attempt to critique our cultural assumptions of relationships, and some of his critiques are valid. I do think more people would benefit from time being spent single, and I do think some people jump from relationship to relationship with a string of broken hearts in their wake. But that morsel of usefulness is buried in piles of steaming bullshit. It asks the question, what is wrong with our relationships? And answers it with, too much lust. The end. Don't worry about it. And I often find that relational problems are a lot more about our inability to see past our own hurt and listen to others. To take accountability and make sustained changes for others. It perpetuates and worsens some of the worst assumptions of purity culture. And there's some real incel-y shit like baked into this. So, quote, Ben didn't want to kiss before marriage, but Alyssa tempted him into it. They maintained their virginity, but only in the technical sense of the word, which I don't know exactly what that means.
Yeah, I don't either.
Then she started cheating on him. I was crushed, Ben told me. I had violated my own standards and, more importantly, God's standards by kissing. And it turned out that this wasn't even the woman I was to marry. For several months, Ben wrestled with guilt, but finally laid it at the foot of the cross and moved on. But what about Alyssa? I wonder if she has ever realized she needs that forgiveness. Does she realize she played a part in tearing down his purity? Does she feel pangs of guilt for breaking his heart? Does she even care?
No. Alyssa.
That shit feels incel-y to me.
Yeah, I was thinking that earlier.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Like we said in our last episode, purity culture is just rape culture with a smile. Mm-hmm. And this like really is bleeding. You see like peaks of that at its worst. Another quote, I think many girls are innocently aware of the difficulty a guy has in remaining pure when looking at a girl who's dressed immodestly. Now, I don't want to dictate your wardrobe, but honestly speaking, I would be blessed if girls considered more than fashion when shopping for clothes. Yes, guys are responsible for maintaining self-control, but you can help them by refusing to wear clothing designed to attract attention to your body.
Wow. That's so wild.
He pays lip service like, yeah, it's a guy's job for maintaining self-control.
It's basically like it's your responsibility to help a guy not assault you. Mm-hmm. Which we know is rape culture.
Also, what is clothing designed not to attract attention to your body? Like, the dresses that you see in, like, really fundamentalist religions? Sure. Mm-hmm. But even that has, like, a body... At this point, it's basically just, like, potato sacks.
Well, they're on your body.
Exactly.
So if someone is looking at your body, I mean, that's where your clothes are.
And how dare you have a body?
Unless you're me, and then most of them are on your floor. But yeah, like that's right. Also, do you want to know a little interesting tidbit?
Absolutely.
Fundamentalist women that wear those pastel dresses, and they have those like those big braids. They're allowed to have that haircut and those braids because it was based off of Farrah Fawcett in the 70s, who was like hot.
Yeah.
Right?
She was a sex symbol at her time.
Yeah. And so they were
and
like...
still today.
She might be dead. She might be
dead. Yeah, no, she's definitely dead.
Oh.
No, Farrah Fawcett of the 70s still hot. That's my point.
Why did I whisper it?
This is going to be such a hard pivot.
I'm sorry.
Let's talk more about the objectification of women. Fuck.
All right, this is a serious podcast. Let's get ourselves together.
We are professionals.
Pull yourself together. Now it's hot.
Yeah, air conditioning now. Where'd you get?
We're never going to get through it.
Quote, when I meet a beautiful girl and I'm tempted to be overly impressed by her external features, I try to imagine what this girl will look like when she's 50 years old.
50?
The girl may be young and pretty now, but what happens when the beauty fades?
Okay, first of all, go fuck yourself, Joshua Harris.
Yeah.
You have to be 45 years old, and it's fine. We look good. The other thing is like, this is so complicated. I know it's like, yeah, don't just base everything on looks, but also like, it is okay to be attracted to a person.
Yeah.
It is okay to find yourself attracted to the looks of a person, right? Like, not everyone is. It's like, that's something about you. I don't know how to explain it. I'm drunk on all this.
Drunk on Farrah Fawcett. Also, like, 50-year-old women can be beautiful and gorgeous and sexy.
Farrah Fawcett was.
Yeah. And some people in in their 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s, date. Quote, I believe a man needs to say something such as, we are growing closer in friendship. I don't want to be upfront about my motives. Imagine a guy saying this to you. With your parents' permission, I want to explore the possibility of marriage. I'm not interested in playing games of being boyfriend and girlfriend. I'm ready to be tested by you, your family, and those who are responsible for you. My desire is to win your heart.
That would be terrifying.
It's very it's very businessy.
Yeah, it's very transactional. You're right. Like, I'm interested in purchasing this girl.
And it ends with the idea that your spouse, their heart and their body belong to you. And belong is used in this book specifically in evangelical culture, like, a lot. Mm-hmm. I just don't agree with that.
Right.
Okay, so that's the book.
Okay.
There's a part 2 to this episode that I want to get into.
Yeah.
And this is titled, I Actually Kind of Like Joshua Harris.
Okay. Now, you really are taking me on a journey.
Yes, I am. So.
Well, he does have a fedora.
Like most cringy people, I had a fedora phase. I am owning up to it. I am cringe, but I am free. So Joshua Harris was the oldest of 7 children in his family. And like we talked about, that family is one of the earliest adopters of homeschooling, parentheses, Jesus is virgin. He wrote this book in 1997 when he was 21, and I was not yet born.
Okay.
He was married 1 year later in 1998.
Wow.
He then worked in the church, pretty much because he had written this book. That was his main qualification. He went from pastoral intern to lead pastor in Gaithersburg, Maryland, which is coincidentally like right next to where I went to high school. I did not know that until doing research for this, but we were neighbors for like a while. This is the version of Joshua Harris that I knew before starting this project. And to me, this version of Joshua Harris was the villain of my childhood. He left in 2015 to go to an actual seminary. He said he resigned as lead pastor to broaden his views, which is admirable. Mm-hmm. He came to this conclusion after church leadership mishandled a child sexual abuse case by not going to the police, which is less admirable.
Yeah.
I have some details about this case, but essentially there was a church member who was convicted of molesting 3 boys, and church officials knew about this and didn't do anything, despite having gone to the police about similar things in the past. Mm. This is horrible, obviously, but it did seem like it made an actual impact on him, which is more than can be said for other evangelical leaders. So in 2015, he and his family moved to Vancouver for seminary. In 2016, he said publicly that he was reconsidering the context of I Kissed Dating Goodbye, including apologizing to someone who had been hurt by it via tweet. Someone said, this book has been used as a weapon against me, and he just said, I'm sorry.
Whoa, I didn't know we were going to get a Joshua Harris redemption story. This is exciting.
In 2018, Joshua Harris had his publishers stop printing I Kissed Dating Goodbye and was publicly critical of it. Most notably, he starred in a documentary called I Survived I Kissed Dating Goodbye, produced by one of his fellow students in seminary. He did not produce it or profit from it.
Oh my God.
The documentary is good. He's clearly in the middle of some kind of deconstruction journey in it. Mm-hmm. So it's very much like a story in progress. In this, he talked to many people impacted by his book via Zoom, in person. He talked to dating experts, Christian sex therapists, single people. He doesn't totally disavow it, and it's still evangelical with some shitty beliefs. There's hints of homophobia at points throughout the documentary, for instance. But I still respect anyone willing to re-examine their beliefs, and I think he really was honestly re-examining them. And then, on July 11th, in the year of our Lord and Savior Alfred Kinsey, 2023, Joshua Harris released a statement on I Kissed Dating Goodbye. I'm going to read parts of it, but the full thing is worth a read. You can find it on his website at joshuaharris.com. Quote, my thinking has changed significantly in the past 20 years. I no longer agree with its central idea that dating should be avoided. I now think dating can be a healthy part of a person developing relationally and learning the qualities that matter most in a partner. To those who read my book and were misdirected or unhelpfully influenced by it, I am sincerely sorry. I never intended to hurt you. I know this apology doesn't change anything for you, and it's coming too late, but I want you to hear that I regret any ways in which my ideas restricted you, hurt you, or gave you a wrong view of yourself, your sexuality, and your relationships.
Wow.
Hey, there's more. To those of you who benefited from this book, I am grateful that something I wrote helped you. But, to borrow an analogy from the automotive industry, If a car serves some people but has a flaw in its design that causes damages to others, good intentions by the car maker and even the endorsement of other customers don't override the problem. I cannot recall copies of my book that have been published. However, my public critique in written and documentary form and the numerous media interviews I've done in the past several years are my attempt to both apologize and spread the word of the problems that I see in it. In the time since my books were unpublished and the documentary was released, my beliefs have shifted significantly. My own marriage ended. I see how damaging purity culture and its ideas of sex and gender have been to many, myself included. In particular, I want to apologize for the ways my books and teachings have harmed LGBTQ+ people. At the time I filmed the documentary about my reevaluation, I was trying to do so within the confines of the evangelical church I found my home in for so long. But I've since realized I'm no longer a Christian. I'm grateful for people both within and outside the church who are talking honestly about religious trauma, the danger of purity culture teaching, the dangers of manipulative, controlling, fear-based religion. Whether you agree or disagree with my views, I hope that you'll think for yourself and be compassionate toward those whose experiences have been different than yours. I wish you the best on your journey, Joshua Harris.
Whoa!
Yeah.
What a twist!
The dude really re-examined his beliefs.
Oh my God.
And kind of blew up his life because of it.
And I think also this might be a little bit of proof, everyone, that you're not ready for some stuff when you're 21 years old. You're not an expert on the world when you're 21 years old. Mm-hmm. It is the time for just beginning to explore those things. Mm-hmm. And you are not going to be the same person when you're 42 years old, right?
And that's okay.
And that's okay. It's as it should be.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you'll fundamentally be the same person, but if I still held to the ideas I had when I was 21, I'd be a mess. Mm-hmm. Well, can we get Joshua Harris on the podcast?
I hope so. I would love that.
Oh my God.
Joshua Harris, if you're listening, hit me up.
Joshua Harris, I'm sorry if I made fun of your fedora.
I feel very okay shitting all over 21-year-old Joshua Harris because I like him now.
Yeah.
From what I can tell. So the book is no longer being published. I got my own copy for this, though. And the documentary that he released has since completely bombed.
Oh my God.
Because the audience for it was evangelical Christians, and now they hate him.
Wow.
So he has since founded Clear and Loud, a, quote, creative agency focused on story-driven content, and has a podcast of the same name. According to his website, he volunteers for the organization Hello Yellow, which overall seems to be volunteering in a city, just meetups and social stuff and helping out the city. And overall seems to be a pretty decent enough guy. I want to end by letting Joshua speak for himself. This is from the end of that 2018 documentary, which is available for free online. This is an apology to those hurt by I Kiss Dating Goodbye. I can't tell you how to feel about this apology or whether or not to accept it, but I think it's worth playing, especially to hear him in his own voice. It definitely hit my heart the first time I heard it.
My thinking has changed since I wrote I Kiss Dating Goodbye. I think that its premise is flawed. I don't agree with a lot of my own book. But whether you agree with me today or you agree with what I wrote 20 years ago, I hope that you will think for yourself. And I hope you'll engage with people who have stories that are different than yours, people who disagree with you. I hope you'll take the time to listen to them. Listening to people has changed me. I want to say to anyone who was hurt by my book that I'm so sorry. And I know that that's coming too late. I know it doesn't really change anything for you. But I never meant to harm you. And I hope that somehow me going back and evaluating all this and owning up to mistakes in my book will somehow help you on your journey. You know, I used to be so afraid of getting something wrong. But I'm not afraid anymore. You can change your mind about things. You can make mistakes. And honestly, there's something so freeing about just being able to say, I was wrong.
That took such a turn.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I didn't know that at the beginning. Wow.
It has been a journey for me to realize, First of all, Joshua Harris and I, despite having very different journeys, kind of have a lot of similarities in our journey. Mm-hmm. I was going to be a pastor. It kind of blew up my whole life when I came out. I also see, in some ways, Joshua Harris as a victim of purity culture as well. Mm-hmm. He was all in. Obviously, this dude believed it. He was sincere in his beliefs. The culture took it too far.
Right.
And he uncritically propagated it. I Kiss Dating Goodbye, and purity culture more broadly, presents a view of relationships that's deeply fucked up, making sex at once the most important thing and off limits in your life. Any and every relationship, especially the opposite sex, as it were, is brimming with sexual tension. Despite all their complaining, purity culture sexualizes people, especially kids, in ways that non-evangelical culture just doesn't. It gets pretty much everything wrong regarding sex, relationships, dating, marriage, and just generally what it means to be a person. There's a lot to be said about purity culture. So listeners, if you want to share your purity culture stories with us, you can send us an email at ihatejamesdobson@gmail.com.
We have a Gmail?
We do have a Gmail.
I'm going to send prank emails.
Next time, we're going to have, dare I say, a hopeful episode of the show.
Wow.
We're going to end this series on purity culture, hopefully with a more positive spin. I'm really excited to share it with all of you, but until then, please know that our Lord and Savior, the Vine Girl who said, "Look at all those chickens," made you special and loves you very much. Oh, and I hate James Dobson.
And I hate James Dobson. And I feel unsure about Joshua Harris. But I love you, Jake.
I love you, Rod. I Hate James Dobson is a labor of love, written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Jake. I am honored to be joined by my amazing co-host, Brooke. If you're enjoying the show, please consider rating and reviewing it, and if you want to connect with us more, you can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at I Hate James Dobson, and on Twitter at IHateJDobs. You can also send us an email at ihatejamesdobson@gmail.com. Our theme music is by Trendsetter, and the song is called Mood Maze, and the lovely piano you heard earlier is a song called Ghost Piano by Yeti Music. Special thanks to Drew, Lindsay, DJ, Jack, and Jordan. I truly could not do this without your help. And thank you, reader, for enjoying the show. You can tell which part of these I wrote while high, including these cold opens. Because the first one, welcome to I Hate James Dobson. Oh, so stupid.